Auzubillahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum and a very warm welcome to World This Morning. I am your host Hajra Sati, and unfortunately I couldn't be joined by my co-host. But as you know, it's Monday and we have just come out with the weekend. It was a lovely weekend and I was going through very interesting articles and I came across one on The Guardian, and I love reading Guardian because it offers very different sort of perspective. So the article was about how the humans are developing the artificial intelligence to harness the energy of the animals, and it specifically talked about the marine animals, the whales and the sharks and the dolphins also. So why I chose this article, because it beautifully is confounded in the finds of the the infotainment. So the article described how there was this one person who was kayaking at the beaches of North Carolina, and what happened was that the other moment he found himself to be there was a big huge whale that came out of the ocean and it shredded its kayak, and he went down into the depths of the ocean, and the next moment he found out that there was a meeting of the whales going on there, and that whale deliberately took that man into the depth of the ocean to that meeting, and he witnessed beautiful moments of their sounds and of how they're communicating with them. And then the moment there were a lot of onlookers at the beach who have actually captured this moment and then uploaded on the YouTube, and how it became a very viral movement. So when that person came back out, he was so struck by the fact that how is it possible that a whale hits his kayak and he's left unscathed? It's because a lot of people said that the whale deliberately wanted him to take him away to that meeting, and that unfolded a bigger debate how our relationship is with the animals. Mostly it's dominated by very bloodthirsty and the violence and exploitations, and how humans have been hunting whales and sharks and dolphins because there's oil that is extracted from them and it offers very cosmetic benefits and it's used in the cosmetics. Then the article mentioned another person who was actually employed in the US Navy, and he was deployed on a mission back in the in 60s or 70s at the height of the Cold War, about how he was deputed to spy on the Soviet submarines. But what happened was that he witnessed beautiful sounds of the whales and the marine life, and he captured them and he converted them into a song, and which was released, and it was a massive hit. And then this produced a momentum, and how he advocated that we should ban the whale hunting because we are very much into the exploitation and the marine life is getting exploited and we're not offering any benefits to that. So that is why we are living in an anthropogenic age, because humans are exploiting or damaging other ecological system. So that unveiled a greater debate about how we humans, they are actually venturing into the artificial intelligence where they're able to capture the voices or the sounds of the dolphins, and then they want these sounds to be deciphered. Of course, we cannot understand the communication with that, but this is how nature works, and it is so beautiful on the philosophical level about how our relationship with the nature is. And earlier on I talked about that how trees are also actually communicating underneath our foot into the soils by dumping the nutrients, which is exactly sort of the communication signals that they're sending to one another, and this entire ecological system is called Wood Wide Web. So that was a very beautiful conception of how nature actually works and how there's so much out there that we need to unveil, and that there's a lot of hikmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we need to talk about, that we need to unveil, and that our intellect needs to understand that in the first place. So moving on to our top stories, which is about that has dominated the global headlines. It's about the funeral of the Queen Elizabeth II. The momentous state funeral of Queen Elizabeth II will be held today, as King Charles III is prepared to host the world leaders. The first members of the public were already camping out in the advance to catch the glimpse of Monday's grand farewell at the Westminster Abbey, which is expected to bring London to a standstill and will be watched by billions of viewers worldwide. US President Joe Biden flew in the late Saturday, one of the dozens of the head of the states, arriving as Britain stages its biggest ever policing operation around the historical funeral for its longest reigning monarch. The death of the Queen Elizabeth, aged 96, on September 8, after 7 decades on the throne, has sparked an outpouring of the emotions that has seen hundreds of thousands of the people flock to her coffin lying in the state at the state parliament and the British Parliament. Mourners have faced waits of up to 25 hours as queues have snaked for miles along River Thames. Admission to the lines look set to be closed at some point on Sunday. And of course, with the demise of the Queen Elizabeth II, she was very well loved among her subjects around the globe. It has sparked a broader debate about the monarchy and the republicanist people, who really wanted to side themselves from the concept, the idea of monarchy, because it is related with the colonialism and with the very dark history which it has. But then again, we will see in the future how this debates unfold. So moving on to our another top story, which is about our Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari Saab, who has reached Washington to participate in the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly beginning today in New York. Ambassador of Pakistan to United States, Masood Khan, welcomed Bilawal Bhutto upon his arrival in the US Capitol. During his stay, Foreign Minister Bilawal would meet his US counterpart, Antony Blinken, in New York on the sidelines of United Nations General Assembly session. So I am pretty sure that the Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari Saab will be very deliberate when he talks about it, because he is a good speaker, and I do believe that he's inherited these genes from his mother, who was a very well-versed speaker when it comes to that. Now moving on to our third story, which is about the cricket match. So Pakistan will take on England tomorrow in the first T20 of the 7-match series at National Stadium in Karachi. PTV Sports HD will telecast the entire series live. Karachi will host first 4 T20Is on September 20th, 22nd, 23rd and 25th. Thereafter, the action will move to Lahore, where 3 T20Is will be played at the Gaddafi Stadium on September 28th, 30th and October 2nd. I think that is a moment of pride for us, because when an international cricket is coming into the country, there are a lot of broadcasting rights, a lot of local economy is plumping up, and it's a really good moment for us because England's team is coming to Pakistan after quite a while, right? So England, yes, is coming after the 17 years to be more precise, and that is a moment for pride for us, because we really want the revival of cricket on Pakistani grounds, and we are very crazy and very emotional about cricket, because I do feel that this game has invested us in a lot of emotions into it, because it's when it comes to the cricket, it's more about the emotions than the game itself. Okay. So moving on to our topic, which is about how we are affected by the climate change, and we have seen the flooding season here, how the massive monster monsoon has affected Pakistan. So Sindh and Balochistan represents just one big whole ocean, because there's so much water which has crept into it. And also the duration of the monsoon spells has prolonged so much that there's so much anomaly regarding the monsoon. It started from the Balochistan, then it traveled on to the north, which is another anomaly, because usually it's the other way around. And how this entire flooding season is intersecting with the women disempowerment, I would say, and the social inequality, the social injustice, and how Pakistan needs to be more climate resilient when dealing with that, and how does the climate justice and the social equality factor fit into this equation, because we have a very good guest into the studio who is going to elaborate on these points very aptly, and I'm really glad that we have our guest, who happens to be Barrister Ali Tahir. He is also an analyst and a lawyer. So Assalamu alaikum Ali, and thank you so much for coming to our show.
Walaikum assalam, my pleasure completely.
Lovely. So Ali, as we were talking before that, my team and I went to the DI Khan, and we witnessed the first-hand devastation that the flooding has caused there. All the flooding has ruined the houses there, the infrastructure there, the roads were destroyed, and there was no school there. And of course, it's also a resource-deprived area, but it has further added to the disempowerment of the local community there. So how does the law in our statute deals with the entire situation? And are there specific laws in our constitution that deals with the climate aspect of it?
You've asked a very relevant question, but what we need to understand here is that the law always talks about precaution before cure. Of course,
Right.
now since they've gone through this tremendous difficulty, and of course it's very sad to hear about it as a Pakistani.
True.
Our Pakistani brothers and sisters being in that situation, it's even difficult to imagine. And of course it's only Allah Ta'ala that is giving them that will to survive in such, as you've already said, it
True.
is illustrative of an ocean. um, there are laws in terms of the fact that how do we rehabilitate these people, and the major responsibility is with the National Disaster Management Authority, which has in its own act, and then within the provinces you have the provincial, the PDMAs, the provincial disaster management authorities as well, along with the district administration. If you look at the criminal procedure code, you'll find that there are provisions within that that are suited for such rehabilitation, and how the district administration has to go in and help these people. But what is more important in terms of the environment and in terms of the climate is the things that we had to do before all of this happened. And for that, we, of course, there was the Kyoto Protocol and there was the Paris Protocol, and to enforce that protocol, we had in fact made the Climate Change Act of 2017. That Climate Change Act of 2017 makes a commission. That commission is headed by the Prime Minister of Pakistan, and they have to take these issues very seriously so that we address them head on before these natural disasters come and hit us in the face, knock us out completely. We have to be vigilant and we have to be ready, we have to be prepared. This is not the first time that this happened. Back in 2010 we've already witnessed these floods, and then year after year after year, whether they were larger or smaller in scale, we kept seeing that they were going on. And what is very important in this aspect is that of course there is a climate change ministry, there is a commission as well headed by the Prime Minister, but actually this environment is regulated by the Environmental Protection Act of 1997.
Right.
If you look at that act, I'll tell you of a case myself.
True.
A very major ministry of the federal government was burning garbage within its premises. The petitioner went to the Sindh High Court. I was representing him in court. She was a climate rights activist, and the Sindh High Court was pleased to restrain that federal department from burning garbage within the premises, and they did ask them that you are the major part of this climate action protocols, and even then you're doing this. So you see that seriousness within society. The laws are advanced, the laws are there, the regulations are there, the SROs are there. We have a climate change policy as well. It's from 2012. It's ongoing, and if you look at it, you would see that it's pretty much a paramateria with what the US has, and it is pretty much a paramateria with what the UK has. But on the official as well as the social level, I think that responsibility, that need, that urge for urgency, that is missing. And right now, insofar as, because right now when we're talking, this is ex post facto the floods. That fact, it's a fait accompli. The floods have happened. Now the only idea is to rehabilitate them. And I think that there is one major issue which I think is being missed right now, which we are not talking about enough, and that is with regard to the regulation of charities as well. If I belong to Sindh, I come from Sindh.
Okay.
I'm here temporarily in Islamabad as well. And what I can see in Sindh is that in Karachi, every second street you can see a board saying charity for flood victims.
Right.
Without regulation, how do you know where that money is going?
True.
So we do have regulated charities. We have ED, we have Selani. They're doing tremendous work, and we would salute them from both hands for doing what they're doing. We would give them a 21 gun salute. But then there's this issue with that money, whether it is being funneled to rehabilitate and to help those people that are in need right now, or whether that money is being funneled for personal interest. And I think that is a very major issue that is not being given the concentration that it should. As far as the laws go, the constitution, of course, there's the right to life. The Supreme Court, back in the Shaila Zia case, this was 2001 we are talking about. In the Shaila Zia case, they've said that right to environment is included within the right to life. Right to life does not mean vegetative life. It does not mean that I'm just going to be there, a breathing soul without any of the perks and privileges, and the environment is a part of that perks and privileges that God has offered us. And so the Supreme Court has already recognized this. The Sindh High Court is very serious about climate action petitions, about climate action suits. The Islamabad High Court is very serious about these things. In the Lahore High Court, if I don't know if you would know about it or not, Justice Mansoor Ali Shah, who sits in the Supreme Court right now, he was the Chief Justice and he made green benches. Those green benches were supposed to not only hear environmental petitions on an urgent basis, but to dispose the same and to issue continuing mandamuses. So I think, of course, there are institutions, they want to do some work, but at the end of the day, the society has not really accepted the fact on how climate change is. And since we are talking about the law, I'm a student of international law as well. You see, there's this concept of reparations in international law. And it's a very simple formula, anybody with common sense can understand it. I am state A, you are state B. Because of my actions, because you suffer damage. Because of the causation of my actions, you've suffered some financial losses. Reparations in those cases become your right.
Okay, right. You talked about the reparations, right? So I will talk about it in the more global north versus south debate in that terms. And the concept of the reparation envisions two things. So one is that the recognition that we need to transition to a more climate friendly country or the environment when it comes to that. And secondly, the fact that we need to have, or the global south or north need to have a recognition of the fact that they did immense damage to the environment, and which is manifesting in the form of the climate change and the floodings that we see in Pakistan, massive floodings that have affected so much of the country. 33 billion people are affected by these. That means one in every 7 person is affected by the climate damage or the climate losses. And our losses, the initial estimates were pointing at towards the $12 billion, but the newer assessment is pointing more than that. It's about above 30 or 40 billion dollars in the first place. And this is not generally that's it, because I do feel as the water recedes back, the scope of the calamity is going to be known more than that after that, because there's going to be a very broader assessment of that. So when it comes to the reparation, do you feel that the global north is doing more when it comes to walking the talk on the climate change or climate justice?
Absolutely. I mean, you look at it. Let me just come to reparations first.
Right.
The International Court of Justice had given Nicaragua reparations only for the reason that the US had sent some forces inside the country, and they had, tried to bring up a regime change within that country.
Right.
So reparations is internationally recognized. And when you look at the situation right now, what I do not understand is, why do we see this aid that is coming in as a demand for charity? This is not a demand for charity. Social and economic rights, they are part of international treaties.
True.
Just as much as civil liberties are.
True.
So you see, the ECOSOC chamber is within the United Nations. If you look at the ICSCR, the civil rights are on one side, yes, but then social and economic rights are there as well. Now when you look at economic and social rights, you can very easily decipher that those countries which are manufacturing giants, and they are the major producers of greenhouse gases in the world, of carbon emissions in the world.
Right.
They are the ones who need to pay developing countries like Pakistan, who have nothing to contribute in terms of this catastrophe, but who are at the receiving end of all of the end result and the consequences and the suffering that comes from this climate change. And I think that in that way, Pakistan needs to realize that as a state, that the money that has to come into Pakistan to help our people, this is not charity.
Right.
This is not aid even, I would go as far as saying.
Right.
This is not something that that countries that are richer and that have been contributing to this problem, they can't take it as a discretionary payment. This must be taken as a stance and as a demand that whatsoever it may be, Pakistan must be paid the money which it has lost and the money which it needs to rehabilitate its people, because of no fault of its own, but because of the fault of other nations. And I think that's a very, very simple principle of international law, and that can be followed.
Right. I can definitely feel the flair of the judge, or what do you call it, the lordship in you, because you have that sort of energy, which is very wonderful. Now coming back to the concept of the social inequality, feminization, and again, the climate justice when we are talking about it. So, for example, when I talked about our visit to DI Khan, I firsthand witnessed how women who were mostly employed in the pottery making or the agriculture sector there, it has been vastly damaged by that. And who are plucking cottons or sowing into the fields, because fields have been destroyed because of the gushing water that has destroyed their lively sources of the livelihood there. And also there was another phenomena that I witnessed there. So a lot of their men were going towards the urban areas to diversify their source of income. And when I say that, the women are more at the receiving end of the burden, because they share the double responsibility of looking after their families because their males are not there. So how does the concept of social inequality, do you think it is at the intersection of the feminization of the poverty and the climate justice when it comes to the social inequality?
Absolutely, there's no two ways of thinking about it, and whatever I mean, that was not a question, that was a statement, and that statement I completely agree with it.
Right.
There's nothing more for me to add. But as you know, as things go, I think the problem here is that when you look at the lower strata of society, women already, this is my belief, women already bear a majority of the burden in that section of the society.
True.
And now, since these floods have come in and there are internally displaced persons, these internally displaced persons are just as vulnerable as those from the war on terror.
True.
And since now families are being broken, units are being broken, people have left whatever they had back where the floods came, and they've been rushing, as you said, towards the urban areas. This brings the woman, the feminist question, really into account. You're absolutely right about that.
Right.
Because my belief remains that I'm a student of jurisprudence, and of course I've gone through feminist jurisprudence as well. I've been teaching that in university for 10 years, and I understand that there are ideological ways of of subjugating women in a society to in fact bear the burden, and then there being a patriarchal model as well. Nobody can deny that we have a patriarchal model. I mean, if somebody says that, wait a second, I'll be in disagreement with that contention, we can just brush his argument aside, because that is no argument. That argument has no sense at all. Now, in this scenario, I think it is, at the end of the day, women that will be at the receiving end of the most severe consequences of these floods. There's no two doubts about it. But what remains here to be seen is whether we as a state are right now ready to take that question head on. Because Hajra, what we see generally is that women even otherwise, we need to improve our institutions. Women even otherwise cannot get access to justice. They cannot get access to information. Most of them don't even know what the difference between a district court or a high court or the Supreme Court is. How can we expect them that they would come out and recognize their rights? As Patricia J. Williams once she said, she was a scholar of feminist jurisprudence, and she said that the white feminist sips her coffee and talks about feminist jurisprudence, while that coffee is the result of the labor of a black African who was working in the jungle, and that woman is the real worker. She does not know about that feminism. But what we need to do is that even in the ordinary course of things, we have not been able to bring justice to women on a platter at their doorstep. This issue right now with the floods going on, this is an added challenge. Whether we as a state can cope with that or not, future will tell us. But from what I can see, we need to do much more, and you're absolutely right. The feminist question is right now in the middle of this entire scenario.
Okay, lovely. So I would just, you mentioned about the green benches, right? So the green benches is a concept that has fascinated me, because how we've incorporated the climate justice into our legal jurisprudence, and it is a very pressing and burning issue nowadays, especially when it comes to Pakistan, because as United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said that Pakistan or the region of the South Asia is 17 times more at the risk of the climate crisis, because we have seen how the floodings have unfolded. We have seen before floodings there was gloves, there were heat waves, there were the vanishing of the entire spring season, and the way the things are rolling out, I do feel that there will be no autumn season. It will be just a transition towards the winter. So we were very proud of the diversity of the seasons, but we are witnessing how climate change or the climate crisis is making that diversity a very bland sort of thing. So can you talk more about the green benches, because I'm fascinated by this concept?
Of course, you see, I'll give you an example of a petition. There's an agriculturist, he comes into court, he goes all the way to the Supreme Court, and his contention remains that this water which he requires is being withheld. So it was, of course, this was before the floods, much before the floods, and the water was being withheld from his lands. And he said that this is dangerous to the environment. Environment has been recognized as a fundamental right of the Constitution in the Shalazia case by the Supreme Court of Pakistan. And he came to the Supreme Court and he got his relief. The authorities were ordered to restore access to water to his lands. These green benches were there to listen to these sort of environmental petitions. As I was telling you about a case that I was proceeding with myself, where a government ministry in itself was burning garbage within its territory, when the law states, the Environmental Protection Act of 1997, that they cannot emit any such emissions. But they were doing it, and so we went to the court. So this jurisprudence is now being recognized. And if you ask about the Shalazia case, what happened in the Shalazia case was that WAPDA was installing some giant electric infrastructure right next to the petitioner's house, and the petitioner came to the court and she said she filed an original constitutional petition before the Supreme Court under Article 184(3) of the Constitution of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan 1973, and her major contention was that this electric infrastructure that WAPDA is installing would ultimately make my health suffer. It would have consequences for my children, for my family, and the Supreme Court agreed. And WAPDA was restrained from making polls there unless adequate compensation was given and acquisition proceedings were converted. So these I'll just end it. These green benches are there to listen to petitions which relate to environmental matters, and this was the brainchild of Justice Mansoor Ali Shah when he was a Chief Justice of the Lahore High Court.
Okay, that's very lovely, and I'm fascinated by how Pakistan is responding to the climate crisis, to the flooding, and how green benches are there in our legal jurisprudence, because the issue of the environment, which in the not very distant past seemed to be not very pressing and burning issue, has now attained the sort of importance that it has dominated our national discourse, our political discourse when it comes to that, because we have seen how flooding has unrolled into the Pakistan and how it has affected all 4 provinces, not just one. It's Punjab, it's KPK, it's Balochistan, it's Sindh, it's Gilgit-Baltistan, the Kashmir areas. Our glaciers are melting, and of course the flooding and the erratic monsoon season has become more vicious when it comes to that. And we have seen how we cannot attain the climate justice unless we incorporate the elements of the social justice with that and the climate justice with that, and empowering more women out there, because when local communities and the marginalized people, they claim that particular area or ideology, I think the fight against the climate change is going to be more easier when it comes to that. So with that, we are going on a short break, and after we come back, we have a very interesting very interesting guest in the studio who is going to unroll a very interesting conversation. So stay tuned. welcome back. And before going on to the break, we were talking about the climate justice, social equality, and how we need to have the social safety protocols here so that we make sure that the community who is suffering from the flooding, who is vulnerable to these sort of calamities, do not suffer, and we have a social safety net out there to secure themselves. And I would also like to again mention that when I went to the DI Kanalog with my entire team, I firsthand witnessed the devastation, the scale of the devastation there, and how people were actually, the community, the local community, they're the first responder to the crisis because they're the most vulnerable to that, and they have been affected by the crisis. And I was really glad that there was a social safety net out there which was protecting them, which was the name of the Benazir Income Support Program. Of course, it's not a new program, it's an old program. It started back in 2008, and it's a social safety net that has been protecting the vulnerable people, the poverty afflicted people out there, giving them the money, and it has been dispensing 25,000 rupees to each person, to each family out there, so that they can that can help them in the rehabilitation, in the recompensation of the things that have been damaged there, of their houses that have been damaged there, of their livelihoods that have been damaged there. And I also witnessed that how there were lots of pottery making, what you call in the Urdu the matkas, or the earthen pots, that were massively damaged there. They were broken, and the picture that represented there, I felt that I was in some ruinous areas like that of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, because there was so much damage of the infrastructure, be it the roads, be it the households, be it their other institutions like the schools and stuff like that. And so that was very heart-wrenching to observe that. But at the same time, how our government is looking after them, how the Benazir Income Support Program is helping people out there to ensure that they are not left out by this crisis, and they're able to rehabilitate and able to stand on their feet. And once again, I would like to say that Pakistan is less than 1% of the global carbon emitter contributor, and yet we are the 5th most vulnerable country when it comes to the climate change. And then again, the amount of the damage that the initial assessment reports is more than $40 billion when it comes to that. And we're going to have a more broader assessment when the things streamline and the water recedes back, because the water is still there in the Sindh and Balochistan, and it represents a one big huge ocean out there. So to talk more about it and explore these sort of aspects, I have a very amazing guest who happens to be my colleague, and I would very aptly put it that I am very comfortable having this sort of conversation, because he's very well learned when it comes to that. And so I'm joined by my fellow news anchor who happens to be Shahzad Qayyum. Assalamu alaikum, Shahzad, and thank you so much for coming to our show.
Wa alaikum assalam. Thanks a lot for having me this morning.
Right, Shahzad. So we have seen that how the damages or the reparations that we are talking about have affected the flood-affected people, and you have been covering this. So what is your assessment of that?
See, Hajira, first of all, excuse me, just like you said that it has something that has never been witnessed by Pakistan before.
True.
It's it's one of its own kind of flood. I mean, recently a US official was here, and she actually came back. She went back and she said that it will probably take around 6 months for the water to be recede from the areas, flood-hit areas. So that's a huge challenge there. I mean, when you look at the Balochistan, Sindh, there are so many places which are terribly affected by these recent floods, and you have witnessed there by yourself. You went to the Tank area and all those places, DI Khan. And right now, one of the challenges is the water. Water is still there. And then you mentioned about the programs which were initiated by Prime Minister. Now, a lot of folks think that 25,000 rupees will not probably do any good. But when you look at those people, just like you just mentioned, we're talking about people are left there without anything. I mean, you look at their belongings, their properties, their crops, everything has been washed away or destroyed. The livestock is washed away. Nothing has been left there. So 25,000 rupees was actually something that will probably help them to initiate, to start from somewhere. And then obviously, the Prime Minister and the flood response unit and all those in collaboration with the Pakistan Army, a damage assessment report will be also initiated. I think it has been initiated, and the initial amount has been revealed, but it's not the accurate one.
True.
And obviously, the people will be compensated based on those reports right now. So now, as a nation, what we need to do. We need to step up now, just like we did in the October, the 2008 earthquake.
Right.
This one is probably a lot worse than the one that we have faced in the past.
Right.
So our nation overall is very generous in terms of philanthropy and all that stuff, and they are working, they are working very hard to on a private sector, on a private basis. I know a lot of people, they're actually going personally to those flood hit areas and distributing the all the commodities and all the stuff among the flood affectees there.
True.
So that's one thing that we need to make sure that we need to contribute, and it's time for us to step up. And then also another major issue that is going to be witnessed is the a lot of women
Right.
are affected, and the obviously the women are expected. And I was reading somewhere yesterday an article which said that the everyone is being sending essential commodities, food and all those items, but we need medicines as well. We need a lot of stuff which is for the newborn babies, because that's what we're going to be facing pretty soon.
Right.
Another challenge that we're about to face, or we are facing actually in a lot of places, is the waterborne illnesses.
True.
So the dengue is on top of the list. Okay,
Right.
and then you have a lot
Malaria.
of cholera and
Malaria.
the malaria and
Yeah.
gastro sort of
Right.
diseases. So that's one challenge. So medicines once again, and army camps have been established, Air
Right.
Force camp, medical camps have been established at
Right.
various.
Yes, Shazad, you very aptly described the entire scenario. But then again, what do we need to do when it comes to our nation? Because yes, we have been getting aid from the friendly countries and from around the world. But is it exactly the aid that we require? Because aid has certain sort of connotation around it, right? And then there is a talk of the reparations around the globe, that how global south is suffering, particularly Pakistan, because of the actions of the global north. And how do we walk the talk on the climate change when it comes to our nation?
Look, Hajira, it's crystal clear.
Right.
I mean, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres clearly said that Pakistan is less than 1% of the contributor in
Right.
climate
That's
change,
true.
right?
That's true.
Now, Pakistan is suffering for something which was not even done by us. So it was done by, actually there is I forgot the name of this particular organization. They released a report like 3 or 4 days ago. They're like weather experts. And they said that Pakistan should actually ask for compensation from the countries who actually are responsible for this particular flood. Why? Because it was in the result of climate change. What has Pakistan done in terms of climate change? Nothing. Pakistan is
That's
not a
true.
contributor.
That's
So
true.
it's those states which are actually, they have higher emission level, and they are the ones who are actually, responsible for this.
True.
So Pakistan at this point, we are doing our best, in terms of doing whatever needs to be done. But at this point, aid is the only solution. What else we're going to do there? There is nothing left
Right.
there. We need external aid in order to stand up on our feet again.
Right, right. And also talking about the recovery, do you think it's just the recovery that we should be focusing on? Because when it comes to recovery, that means that next year the same community which is already vulnerable to such kind of climate disaster can be more vulnerable. Or is it the green recovery that we should be thinking about, of making our communities more climate resilient and enhancing or strengthening our social safety net? For example, I witnessed how Benazir Income Support Program was very effective in this climate management or disaster management when it comes to that. What's your opinion?
Actually, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has actually already said that, we need to come up with a solution which will actually help us in the future as well. What is it? We don't know yet. Obviously, we have never seen something like this before. First of all,
Right.
we need to make sure if something like this will ever occur in the future, we have proper channels from where water can flow easily.
True,
Right now, I mean, if you take a look, so what happened is that you had these areas which are inundated right now,
Right,
right?
right.
So the bunds were constructed in order for the water not to get into those places,
Right.
and now the water, somehow water still went in there,
True.
right? It's entered in those facilities and those villages, but now what happened is that water level is higher.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
and those particular bunds which were constructed there, they are the ones which are stopping the water to get out now.
Right, right. That's
Okay,
true.
so this is something that we need to first figure out that
Right.
if something like this will ever take place,
Right,
right?
right.
For example, look at the KPK, the construction of that hotel. Why
True.
it was constructed on the
That's
river,
true.
right
That's true.
on the river, in the
On
river.
the riverbed,
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, there was, it's a common sense. You cannot,
Right.
and none of these structures can sustain when the
Right.
water will flow with this speed from the uphills, you know.
Right.
So a lot of stuff needs to be done, and it's just not the something that we all are responsible for it.
True, true. That's very true. And Shahzad, we were having a very interesting conversation, and that just flickered into my mind because when I went to DI Khan, the locals of the area told me that they had the Roth Kohi system there, in which the water is channeled through within the mountain, and it was a very good system of water distribution. But then again, a lot of locals had built their houses in the area of that water, so that the flow is getting obstructed there. So yes, it's a climate change, but then it's also the bad governance which is going on there, and the local community is shying away from adopting the more climate resilient method. Why? Because in the short term they see that okay, their houses or their communities or the farmlands, they're affected by that, but when you see the scale of the destruction, then you will find out
Absolutely.
that how much damage it has caused in the first place, and we need to engineer ourselves into more climate resilient governance when it comes to that, right? So do you think, are we ready for the climate resilient governance, or there is a conversation taking place on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the steps are being taken, and the climate issue has been highlighted in the recent SCO summit as well.
True.
It was one of the primary focus agendas
True.
in that particular SCO summit recently. You know, it was food security, and I mean, obviously, climate change was one of the things which was actually addressed by Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif, and he clearly stated that, you know, we are the victims in the
True.
result of this climate change. So
True,
yes,
that's
we
true.
need to take concrete steps for that. And then once again, you know, when you talk about this scale, you just mentioned about this, the level of the rain we had witnessed recently.
Right.
This has never been seen by anyone before.
True,
You
that's
know,
true.
it doesn't matter what part of the world it is, whether you are in the Western world, whether you are at a country which is already, you know, on the top notch in terms of technology. Flash flood you cannot avoid when you have this amount of rain has been dumped. It was a
Right.
downpouring of a scale which has never seen before.
That's true. That's true. And thank you so much, Shahzad, for enlightening us about this topic, because it's a very hot and pressing issue. And because Pakistan is affected so much starkly by it, that we can witness its a very adverse effect. And the matter of the fact is that Shahzad mentioned that we do not have a substantial contribution in having such kind of crisis in the first place. Yet we are suffering from that, and we need to rightfully ask for what is wrongfully done to us, that we need to talk more on the climate change, right? We need to walk the talk on the climate change. It should go beyond the promises and the pledges that our climate change minister, Mrs. Sherry Rahman, very aptly highlighted in the Bonn conference back in the Berlin in Germany. So it's time that we need to do more, and international community needs to come back and do more on the climate change, because it's a pressing global issue, it's a humanitarian issue, and we need to work more. So with that, we will bid farewell and we will wrap up our segment. So until next time, it's a good boy and good morning.